afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As usual, the meeting is being broadcast live by the County Council's website, and it will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can I please ask that all members and officers have their microphones on mute until they wish or are invited to speak. We have a new member. We do have a new member to the committee, but Mr. Allen isn't here at the moment. I received no apologies today. The first item on today's agenda is the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of November, pages 5 to 12 in your agenda pack, and I move these are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreeable? Thank you. Agenda item 2 is question time. I have received 2 questions today. The first question is from Mr. David Warwick, who is present in the meeting. The question, let Mr. Warwick get settled. Right. The question and its response has been circulated to members of the committee prior to the start of the meeting and will be taken as read. I would like to remind members that no discussion is to be held on these. Mr. Warwick, would you like to ask your supplementary question, if you have one, and it should be to clarify the reply you've been given and should not raise any new issues. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So specialist provision, it mentions specialist provision through the establishment of resource bases. Could you just clarify what that means, please?
Yes, certainly. So the resource-based specialist provision refers to the essentially units or dedicated specialist provision that we've built that's attached to either mainstream schools or specialist schools, special schools. So across Leicestershire, there are 32 what we call resource bases across the whole of Leicestershire that we've put in place and built. 4 of those are attached to special schools and the remaining 28 are attached to mainstream schools, and that's a mixture of primary schools and secondary schools. So that's what we were referring to in that part of the question.
Thank you. So are you saying that the money that would otherwise be designated for EHCPs goes, apologies. I think I'm allowed to ask supplementary questions that I've not necessarily put in before. Oh, okay. All right. In that case, can I change the supplementary question? Because I submitted 2 in writing before the meeting. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, fair enough. All right. The main question is, how is private SEND provision assessed for value for money within the county? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So private SEND provision is used when we are either unable to find or needs children and people's needs cannot be met in any other provision, or that we can't find any other provision, or indeed when parental preference, so the parent chooses a private provision and that's essentially supported by tribunal outcomes. So we use private provision on kind of very few occasions. What we do is ensure that we've got good quality assurance in place and making sure that we've got good commissioning processes to make sure that they're as robust as possible to ensure best value, and that we've got really strong contract management in place then to make sure that we can manage within what's commercially available.
Right, thanks.
Thank you for your questions, Mr. Warwick. You're welcome to remain for the rest of the meeting, or if you wish, you may leave. Thank you. The second question is from Mrs. Sue Whiting, who is present at the meeting. Question and response have been circulated, and I know, Mrs. Whiting, would you like to ask your supplementary?
Thank you, Chair. The answer to your question, does it mean that 4 children with an EHCP and commenced Year 7 in September 2024 have had no educational provision at all to date in this academic year.
Thank you, Mrs. Whiting. No, the answer that we provided set out the number of children who had secured a place who didn't have a place at the beginning of Year 7, and the number of children for whom we were still seeking an education placement. So at the time of writing the response, it was 4. It could well have changed because the number is dynamic, as you can imagine, at all times. Whilst children are awaiting a school place where we are looking to find one, we will offer a range of support to support that child's education. So it could well be that those children are receiving tuition. They could well be supported by their existing school place. So I won't be able to give a breakdown because obviously 4 is a really small number, but we always look at what provision is in place while we're seeking a suitable placement for those children. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Whiting. As you know, you can stay if you wish, or you can leave us. Thank you. Right, item 3, I've received no questions from members. Item 4, I have no urgent matters. Item 5, declarations of interest. Has any member got any interest they wish to declare? No, thank you. And item 7, I have not received any petitions. And we're moving on to the first substantive item, which is a report on the MTFS, Medium-Term Financial Strategy, 2025 to 2026 to 28-29, which is on pages 13 to 50 of your agenda pack. Members should have received a copy of the process, which suggested for dealing with the budget proposals. We will discuss each section in turn like this. And there will then be an opportunity for members to ask questions on that particular area of the report. Jane Moore, Director of Family and Services, will present the report. Also in attendance are Jenny Lawrence and Narinda Samaria from Corporate Resources, who are here to assist in answering questions. I will invite the Director and the Cabinet Lead Member to briefly introduce the report before we scrutinise the proposal as per the process set out on the paper that has been circulated. So I now pass on to Jane Moore.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll start at page 15, paragraph 16, where we set out some of the issues around strategic change, and detailed really that the demand for children and family services does continue to increase, and that we've included a projection of £57 million worth of growth over the period of the MTFS. There are a number of pressures which I'll go through as we go through the report that the department has had in recent years, and as a result of that we've embarked on several fundamental transformation programmes, including defining children and family services for the future and also the Transforming Send and Inclusion programme. Other savings are also being delivered through partnerships such as the Children's Innovation Partnership as well, and again we'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. Over on page 16, we've set out or really brought to your attention the children's social care reforms that the government has recently published. Back in November, they published Keeping Children Safe, Helping Families Thrive, which was followed up or essentially was a policy statement that set out a range of reforms for children's social care and education over the next few years. We've put a brief summary of the headlines of that, and the department currently is working through the policy statement and the guidance in order to ensure that we develop our response to those changes and the delivery of those new requirements, and that the work that we do to undertake that will allow us to understand the financial implications of such changes as well. Your members will recall last year we talked about the financial control measures that are in place, and given the increasingly challenging financial outlook, in addition to the plans around the MTFS, we continue to have the financial controls in place across the department that are tightly operated. We've detailed those in paragraphs 24, and we keep these under regular review as well. So moving on to the proposed revenue budget for the department, the table in paragraph 27 summarises the proposed 25-26 revenue budget and the provisional budgets for the forthcoming MTFS period. And you can see that the net budget for the department is set at 136,746 and rising to 106 million or nearing 162 million over the period of the MTFS. We've detailed also in paragraphs 29 to 31 the changes and relevant transfers as well. So, Chair, I'll pause there just if there are any questions on this section. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Mr. Hunt.
Thank you very much. It's a very striking report and it's very well, very easy to digest. I was curious to know if the new financial controls had made much impact on the budget, but I did detect this is probably in all the reports that are coming through this year because it's the first year that we've been asked that. But my question was on the paragraph 21, which outlines or summarises the headlines in the new Keeping Children Safe and Helping Families Thrive paper. And on Roman 3, it talks about the broken care market and to tackle them with a range of measures to improve competition, regulation and commissioning. Does competition play a big part in the authority's search for care placements? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously this is the national proposals for reform, and in answer to your question, yes, it does. And I think what this is seeking to pull out is that at the moment the competition is relatively limited because the market is predominantly dominated by a number of quite large providers. So the intention of government is to make sure that we improve competition in the system, which in essence means how do we create more opportunities for better placements for our children. So some of the work is about, and I know we're looking at it locally as well, is how can local authorities be encouraged to open their own children's homes, which in essence puts more competition within the system as well. So yes, it's a significant challenge for all local authorities at the moment that the market is predominantly dominated by large private providers.
Thank you. I have a question myself, if I may. It's on page 17, paragraph 28, where it says that the detailed budgets have been compiled on the basis of no paper. And you mention a central contingency will be allocated to SEVISNet. Jane, could that be slightly clarified? Will that be the type of thing about the national insurance on the companies that we get services from or goods? And will that all be included in that contingency? You're answering it for us, Narendra. Thank you.
Yeah, I can answer that. So in regards to that, in regards to the N9 pay award impact, we're specifically referencing the impact on our directly centrally employed kind of staff, and that will be funded through the corporate contingency. There is a knock-on risk and impact in terms of generally kind of the impact of NI, but it's difficult. It's difficult at this moment to know kind of how much of that impact will be passed on to us from providers across different budget areas, and that will need to be kind of monitored and managed as an in-year budget risk and as a significant risk in terms of delivery of the MTFS.
Thank you very much. I think it is a bit in the air. We don't know at the moment, so I am presuming that we will be kept updated on any changes throughout the coming year. Well, it's definitely the first year, but on the knock-on effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can do that as part of the update on the budget position more generally throughout the year as well.
Thank you very much. Has anybody else got any questions or points on clarification on that first section? Now then we'll move on to the second section, if we may, Jane, which I believe is under growth and savings proposals. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the growth that is projected over the next 4 years totals 56.86 million. And I'll just go through briefly each of the areas with an kind of narrative around why we're projecting the pressures that we're projecting. So the first growth projection and pressure is around the social care placements. It's a significant growth pressure across the department and largely relating to the increased costs within children's social care placements, particularly the mix of placements around as a result of the change in demand and numbers in relation to particularly children's residential provision. So the MTFS for this financial year does assume a budgeted position of numbers of residentials as 86 children. And actually what we've seen over that period is a significant increase in that number over and above what we'd projected. So we're now at just over 100 children in residential provision, which is quite significantly over what we'd projected this time last year. The latest projections are suggesting that the children in residential provision could in fact reach about 108 by the end of this financial year, which is a 26% increase against the budgeted position, which obviously has caused a significant pressure in year for us in the current financial year. The increase is predominantly around the number of parent and child placements, which are most often court ordered, and we've seen a significant rise in that over and above what we'd experienced previously. And again, that's added to the increased costs that we're seeing and projecting going forward as well. At the top of page 19, we've set out a graph that shows in green the total number of children within residential provision. And you can see it was pretty stable for a number of years. But at Q4 in this time last year, it really did start to increase, particularly around the number of parent and child placements, which we've pulled out as the orange line in that graph as well. The weekly cost of residential provision is really costly. It averages around about £6,000 per week, but it can vary significantly dependent on the needs of children. And there are a number of contributing factors to the cost of the provision, some of which are the cohort of children, so how complicated the needs are of children and therefore what we need to do to make sure we can meet those needs and look after and care for those children. It's impacted by the age of the children entering residential provision, and we've seen a younger age of children coming into residential provision. And then, as we discussed previously, some of the market pressures and sufficiency are a real challenge for us in terms of the exacerbated weekly cost for our children in residential provision as well. There is a national trend of increasing numbers of children and young people who are coming into care, and our trajectory is following a very similar pattern to that nationally, and we're expecting to see a stable to steady increase of the number of looked after children in Leicestershire over the next or forthcoming MTFS. And key to the budget pressure is the proportion of children that we care for being in residential provision. And you can see at the top of page 20, we've set out a graph that shows the number of children that we've got within our care and the proportion of those children who are in a residential placement. And you can see that shows that now just around about 14.49% of our children in placements are in residential provision. And if we compare that to the same quarter this time last year, we were at just over 10%. So we are seeing an increase in the number of children who are living in residential provision. We are continually focusing on prevention and preventing children coming into our care, but also reducing the amount of time that are in our care as well. And our overall rate of children in care does remain much lower compared to other authorities or comparator authorities as well. The next area of growth pressure is our frontline social care staff, particularly around increased demand, so numbers of children for which we are responsible for supporting, and making sure that we keep our caseloads within manageable limits, which means that we can then undertake good quality work our children. So the growth that's included here is to provide for the increases, particularly in demand at our front door. So that's the service essentially that receives the calls that come in where people are worried about children and that we need to then undertake an assessment or make a decision about the level of service. And we've detailed in paragraphs 44 to 51 the factors that we think has led to the quite significant increase in the number of contacts, so calls coming in or contacts coming into that front door, but also some of the actions that we're taking to try and reduce the numbers or at least manage the numbers more effectively. The third growth area item is the growth that we projected following the Transforming Send and Inclusion programme and making sure that the work that we're doing through that programme remains sustainable. So that the programme is well into its implementation phase now. And we're confident that the work that we've done will deliver significant improvements in the system, but also savings as well, or cost reductions within high needs. We've, as part of the programme, we have considered the workloads and demands that are impacting on our special educational needs and assessment service, and that's specifically around EHCP assessments, EHCP reviews, but also children's placements as well. And we know that the current model and capacity that we've got is failing to achieve our statutory deadlines, so we are not meeting our timeliness around assessments, annual reviews, and also getting placements on time as well. So there was some approved growth in the last financial year, and that's meant that the service has been able to work towards an improved performance. The growth that we are projecting for this year is really about making sure that we stabilise those new processes, we embed the work that we're doing, and that we've got sufficient permanent budgeted capacity to undertake the assessments and the reviews and get the placements that we are required to do as part of the SEND statute. The fourth area of growth is around our unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and as a result of both increase in demand, so numbers of children for whom we're responsible, but also the cost as well. We are projecting quite significant financial pressure as a result of the continued increase in unaccompanied asylum-seeking children coming into Leicestershire, both in our care, but also those who are then become care leavers as well. Unaccompanied asylum seekers come into Leicestershire via a number of routes. One is the National Transfer Scheme that we're part of. We have children who arrive here what we call spontaneously, so they arrive at various points in Leicestershire, and as soon as they arrive in Leicestershire, they become our responsibility to assess. But also we saw a significant number of young people arrive in Leicestershire through the adult dispersal hotels. So they arrived in Leicestershire and then declared that they were in fact children, and we assessed, and indeed they were children and therefore needed to be treated as children as well. So the number of unaccompanied asylum seeking children and care leavers is projected to continue to grow over the period of the MTFS, and particular pressures around the numbers of those who are become care leavers. And we're projecting that will grow by over 200 by the end of the financial year. And obviously that includes the children that will turn 18 and become care leavers that we're responsible for. We will continue to receive referrals through the National Transfer Scheme as well, so there will be more children that come into our care and then become care leavers as they get older as well. And you can see that despite the fact that we have achieved a reduction in the weekly unit cost, the increased demand over time is still putting a significant pressure on the budget as well. And the funding from the Home Office drops quite significantly for those children who are care leavers compared to those children who are in our care. And it essentially doesn't cover the costs of providing the provision for those children. The fifth area of growth is around demand management, but this is a kind of growth reduction target that's been built in to further mitigate some of that risk of the demand-led growth that we've been projecting as well. And we are anticipating that through a combination of existing change programmes, but also some of the business as usual activities, we will manage or mitigating some of that demand that we've built in. And then the final area of growth is around our children in need financial support. So under the Children's Act, under section 17 and 23, financial support may be provided to those children in need following an assessment. And without such support being provided at that level, it is likely that their needs could escalate either into more costly provision or indeed at risk of children entering the care system as well. So we've updated our practice standards in relation to that work, and they're now fully embedded across all services, and they act as a really strong, robust internal framework to set out eligibility criteria for this funding, governance processes and decisions around funding as well. So this growth will allow the current projected spend to align much more closely with the budget that we've got in place, which currently in year is significantly overspent. So again, I'll pause there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do I have any questions or comments? Oh, no, Mr. Hunt.
Chair, I've been through all the growth and savings items, and the growth items come across as basically spending on services which really couldn't be sustained without it, and the ones that are savings that really against all our instincts. So, you know, I know we have to do this, and I know that it's very hard, but you know, my feelings about the service is that I'm just in awe of the staff that we have that have these duties. And I said a moment ago that I found the report very striking, and there's one paragraph 38A which talks about the rising number of young people with complex mental health difficulties, violence and aggression as a result of experiencing trauma, criminal exploitation, risks of harm to self and others, controlling behaviour, repeat missing episodes, etc. And, you know, that's obviously at the very sharp end of what we do, but it's about tackling young people with real difficulties. And to be honest, Chair, I couldn't find anything that I wanted to ask questions about in the rest of the report, perhaps on the schools, on the school section. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Does anybody else have any? Yes, Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Chair. My question is on costs of placements for these children. And if we start off with unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, we can see that in the last two periods that are noted, the cost for weekly units of provision has gone down from 1,130 to 1,000. So I was just going to ask you, Jane, if you could expand on how we've been able to bring the cost down for those as well. And I mean, equally, even for over 18 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, we've seen a similar reduction as well. So we're looking at around £1,000 a week to look after these children. As we go to paragraph, so I can say paragraph related to the graph on page 37, I think somewhere it says it's roughly around £6,000 a week to look after a high needs child in our care. So I would have presumed that it'd be more costly to look after an unaccompanied asylum-seeking child with the difficulties that go with that. So I'm just wondering if you could clarify as well why it seems 6 times more expensive to look after someone that's not from a UASC child, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll come back to that one in a moment. Just in terms of bringing the cost down, I think we'll cover some of this in the savings challenges we've got, but it's a good question, because we're really pleased with the work that's been done to kind of bring the costs back in line with what they ought to be. So the average unit cost for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and care leavers in Leicester is higher than average. And some of that is around availability of provision. So essentially, when we're looking for a placement for a young person, whether they're an unaccompanied asylum seeker or indeed a Leicestershire child, we have to go out to the market to seek a placement for them. And actually, what we know is that the costs of the placements that we've been providing are higher than they are in other local authorities. So we've done a number of things. One is that we have invested in our commissioning team. So we've taken a very deliberate decision to look at the most basic level how we buy things better. So we've kind of recruited to a commissioning team. We've invested up front, and we know that as a result of that, we've seen some cost savings as well. I think also most importantly is that we're looking at how we develop provision in Leicestershire to meet young people's needs, which means we're then buying provision to meet needs rather than buying the provision that's available. And theoretically that should end up being cheaper as well. So there's a whole raft of things that have gone on, which means that the costs have come down quite significantly as well. In terms of the average unit cost, it's a really complicated question to answer, because you're absolutely right. You would, bearing in mind we know the trauma experienced by those children who are coming to our country for various reasons. We know the impact that can have on children. And likewise, as Mr. Hunt has just pointed out, we know that children that we are taking into our care in Leicestershire will have experienced a whole range of traumatic incidences and experiences that have led to some of the behaviours that mean that they either can't stay at home or indeed cost. So I think the answer is it doesn't necessarily manifest as kind of where children come from. The cost of placements is often down to the complexity of the needs of the child and how that complexity manifests as behaviour, which then needs supporting in a really safe environment. So those children that cost us the most money are often those children who have had some really significant traumatic experiences, which means that they are much less able to regulate their behaviour, or that their behaviour is showing some of that trauma. And actually what we know from our unaccompanied asylum seeking children is, and obviously what you can see from the figures, is that less of those children are showing their trauma through some of those behaviours as well. So the placements therefore wouldn't need to be as kind of complex. What I will say though is that the placements that we have our children, our unaccompanied children in care particularly in, are those placements that will meet those children's needs and provide some of that kind of therapeutic environment that they need as well. So really the placement cost depends on the individual child as opposed to why they come into our care in the first place, I guess.
Thank you. Anybody else got any questions? And at this stage, I haven't noticed a cabinet leave member put their hand up for anything. There's nothing at this point.
No, nothing at this point. Thank you, Chair.
Right, we now move on to the next point, which is the savings, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. So the details of the proposed savings are set out in the table at paragraph 64. And also in a bit more detail in Appendix C, and they total 55.6 million in 25-26, and they grow to just under 17 million over the period of the MTFS. The MTFS does aim to make sure that our services are sustainable for children and young people with special educational needs as well. So we have built into the MTFS the cost reductions that are required across the high needs block, and they total 52 million over the period of the MCFS, but you'll note later on in the report that the annual deficit does continue despite that as well. So I'll just briefly touch on each of the savings lines. The first one is our Children's Innovation Partnership, which again members have been briefed on a number of times, which is essentially our programme that is building 8 homes to provide provision for 23 Leicestershire children in care. And the aim of it is to not only provide homes for our children, but also to reduce the over-reliance we currently have on the private sector and making sure that we support children in the right way as well. So there's been an investment of nearly 6 million capital in the programme, including 2 million grant funding from the DFE as well. We've got 4 homes now open, and we've got another 4 due to be opened this year. So the programme is going really well, and we've got our children living in Leicestershire homes as well. The next savings line is around departmental efficiencies and redesign. So in response to some of the national and local challenges, some of which we raised earlier in the report around retaining social workers, but also changing the way in which we deliver to those children who are in need, we've reviewed some of the roles and responsibilities of staff across the care pathway in order to really rebalance workloads, but make sure that the right staff are supporting the right children as well. So the outputs of that will contribute around about 200,000 towards the 0.39 million, and the remainder of the savings in there will arrive from other service redesigns which have taken place during this financial year, and the full year impact will be realised from April 25. The next savings line is around defining children and family services future for the phase 2, and particularly around social workforce strategy. We have reviewed our workforce strategy, and one of the key outputs has been a stronger focus on recruiting international social workers, of which we've successfully recruited a number of international social workers who are here now working in Leicestershire with our children really positively. We are looking at increasing the number of newly qualified social workers, and also making sure that we have a really good quality offer for social workers who want to take up employment with Leicestershire as well. And then finally, we are continuing to work on the over-reliance of agency as well. The next savings line is around reducing our costs through the growth of internal family-based placements, and particularly focused on increasing the number of internal foster carers that we have, making sure that we fully utilise our foster carers, but also increasing the number of special guardianship orders for our children as well, which gives them permanence. And then the final savings area is a new area that we've included in the MTFS this year, and particularly focused on how we can commission things more smartly in order to reduce costs and demand as well. So this is where the majority of the savings are seeking to be achieved as part of the MTFS. We know that the most significant area of growth or pressure for us is around the cost of residential care placements. So as I said earlier, we have invested quite significantly in our commissioning capacity and making sure that we've got the right people in place to buy things better and make sure that we're able to best meet the needs of our children. So we've had a much clearer focus on how we commission placements, how we explore some of the other commissioning models or offers for our children, as well as the development of our in-house provision as well. There are 4 different strands to this. The first strand is around minimising the impact of market cost pressures for children's placements. The second strand is around how we regularly review care packages and costs, making sure that there is value for money and effectiveness, and also it's meeting children's needs. The third strand is around the development of a wide range of other accommodation support options. So a bit like we talked earlier about the unaccompanied asylum seeking children, and how we can develop some different provision for those young people to meet their needs. And then the final strand is going to be achieved through looking at making sure that we've got the right partner contributions, and that we're collectively supporting our children financially as partners as well. And then the final section is around savings under development, and with the ongoing pressures across the MTFS and challenges faced by the council, we are continuing to look at further savings that can be achieved through the department. We've included some of the early proposals in Appendix E, and once we've completed our business cases and really understood the impact of that, we'll be including that in future MTFS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. Just one thing I'd like to just get an update, if I may. Page 26, paragraph 70. It is little d. I just wondered if it is we're still waiting for the Ofsted, or has there any more news since the paper was printed? And this is the residential home match funded by DV, due to open this month, currently waiting Ofsted. I just wondered if we'd had any further news.
No, we're still waiting the Ofsted visit.
Quite nice if Ofsted got a bit of a move on as the home is there ready to go. Okay, has anybody else got any points or questions they'd like to raise on the savings? No? Right, we now move on to the next item, which is on pages 29 to 31, and that is the dedicated schools grant, starting at paragraph 83. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the 25-26 dedicated schools grant continues to be calculated in 4 separate blocks. So the first block is the schools block, which is the individual budgets for maintained schools and academy, but it also includes the growth funding for the revenue costs in delivering additional mainstream places as part of our sufficiency duty as well. The second area is the central school services block. The third is the high need block, which for which we have a provisional allocation. That's the block that funds special schools and other specialist providers and those children whose needs can't be met within mainstream. And then the fourth area of the block is the early years block, and that funds the free early education entitlement as well. So overall on the DSG, we are continuing to see a funding gap around the high needs block, which I'll come on to in a bit more detail, and we're seeing an overall deficit on the dedicated schools grant of 67.5 million by the end of next year, and we're forecasting that will rise to 108 million over the period of the MTFS. And some of that is offset by the reserve funding for new schools growth. So just on the schools block, the schools funding remains delivered through the national funding formula. That's the formula that funds all pupils at the same rate, irrespective of the authority in which they're educated. The 25-26 schools block settlement is 561,885,000, and it is an overall cash increase of 8.4%. Whilst the national funding formula is based on the 2024 school census, funding for local authorities is actually based on pupil characteristics that are recorded on the 2023 census. And that means that any increase over that time in pupils eligible for additional funding, so things like free school meals, would not appear essentially within the allocation, and it might result in us not being possible to meet fully the cost of delivering the national funding formula. Essentially, it creates a gap in funding as a result of the way in which the funding is forecast. So we've been working through what that gap may well look like as a result of the difference in numbers of pupils' free school meals. Additionally, within the schools block, but separate to funding for individual schools, local authorities do receive funding for the initial revenue costs of commissioning additional primary school places, and this has been confirmed now at 2.1 million. We've set out in paragraphs 90 to 93 the school funding formula, and I won't go into the detail, but it's set out there for members to see. In paragraph 94 onwards, we have detailed the inclusion of the schools block transfer. Schools were consulted back in June around the essentially around the transfer of 0.5% of funding from the schools block to the high needs block of the dedicated schools block. And the proposal is that that transfer was made in order to create what we're calling a send investment fund, in order to deliver some focused and targeted intervention in mainstream schools to support and meet the needs of those pupils with social, emotional, mental health. We took that proposal to Schools Forum at their meeting in November, and they did not approve the transfer. And on the 22nd of November, Cabinet gave authorisation for me to seek a decision from the Secretary of State. We were notified by the Secretary of State that she has subsequently approved the proposals that were set out within the consultation. So in order to enact that transfer, in order to move 0.5% of the schools block to the high needs block, we have to cap the gains in funding to individual schools the money that they would gain between 24 and 25, and we have to cap that in order to make sure that the minimum funding guarantee for pupils is still held. We are working through that at the moment and need to submit our funding formula to the ESFA this week, as you can see. Just onto the high needs block, the structure in the national funding formula remains unchanged. The provisional settlement is 106.6 million. So that is a 7% increase per head of the population. But you can see, as set out in paragraph 1 later on, that still doesn't meet the full costs of delivering. Just before I go into that in detail, we do know that government are having a look at the policy in respect of SEND, but that's yet to be confirmed going forward. We've detailed in paragraph 101 the cost reduction savings that have been built into the MTFS that we are seeking to achieve through the Transforming SEND and Inclusion programme, as well as the inclusion of the costs around the additional local specialist places, and also the impact of the SEND investment fund that we're creating through the high needs block transfer. So the forecast position of the high needs block continues to be a significant challenge, and you can see from paragraph 102 that the funding gap before savings is this next year is 28 million, but there still remains a significant funding gap following the savings being achieved of 15 million, which then means that we are having a cumulative high needs funding gap of 79, nearly 80 million by the end of next financial year. So still some really significant pressures on the high needs block, despite the fact that there was a 6% increase in funding going forward. We've detailed a bit more around some of the details around carrying forward DSG, but also the impact of the funding system and the reforms that are required in order to shift the system. We've detailed some of the information around the central services block and what that includes. And then in relation to the early years block, the provisional settlement is 109.2 million, and this funds both of the early years free entitlements. And again, we've set out what those entitlements are as well. So again, I'll pause there, Chair. Thank you.
Does anybody have any points they'd like to raise? Mr. Hunt.
A couple of things I thought was very, very detailed and all to be expected and so on. I'm aware that there's going to be free breakfasts for kids. Is that something? And that doesn't appear to be in the report. And something else I was going to. I'll perhaps come to that later. Is that accounted for in these? In which?
I will just check with my colleague Jenny Lawrence, who is online. My understanding is that money will go directly to schools, but I'm just going to check to see whether Jenny knows the answer.
Yeah, it will be a specific grant that will be allocated directly to schools, so on top of school budgets.
Thank you, Jenny. Did you want to come back again, Max? As
far as the funding system's concerned, you've outlined how it works and everything. How do we stand with respect to other, in our basket of other local authorities in terms of what the schools get through the funding system?
Yeah, thank you. So as set out in the report, the minimum pupil funding is now consistent across all local authority areas. So the amount of funding that each pupil attracts is the same regardless of each authority. And Jenny will be able to just explain it in a little bit more detail, but essentially one of the challenges is that there are additional pots of money or indicators that then attract additional funding per pupil. But I'll just hand over to Jenny because she'll be able to explain it in a far better way than I can.
Thank you, Jane. In terms of school funding, there is only one element within the national funding formula that all schools receive, which is the minimum per pupil funding. Then we have additional indicators, so children that are eligible for free school meals, children who have home addresses that trigger deprivation funding add on to those. So whilst all pupils are funded the same irrespective of where they are, the total funding at local authority level is driven, as Jane said, by the additionality, and that is why it does look as though sometimes local authorities are funded really differently, but it's purely down to those different pupil characteristics.
Thank you. Anybody else got any questions, points? No? Thank you, Jane.
Thank you. So finally, I'll just take you through the capital programme. So the capital programme proposed for children's services totals just over 83 million. The majority is external funding or capital receipts that are expected, and some of the money is the money that was external funding held in reserves. So there is a £225,000 call on the LCC capital funding over the 4-year period of the MTFS. The programme does continue to focus on the delivery of primary and secondary school places, and also additional places that are needing to be delivered to support our Transforming Send and Inclusion programme. 50 million is proposed to be invested in the provision of additional placements, and 20.4 million for send, and 12.6 million investment in other capital requirements. And we've detailed the breakdown of that over the period of the MTFS in paragraph 110. In terms of additional school places, the investment totals 50 million over 4 years, and it's funded through the basic need grant from the DFE and also the Section 106 developer contributions. The SEND programme is a 4-year investment of around about 20.4 million, and the other capital, again, we've broken down what the other capital includes, and obviously you'll note that it includes our Children's Innovation Partnership capital contribution as well. In paragraph 114, we've detailed the funding sources for capital, and again, given a further deep breakdown of each of those funding sources and capital grants as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jane. Anybody else got any comments? No, Mr. Hunt.
On the capital programme, this is always the good bit when the Cabinet comes to tell us what grand things are going to happen in the following year and miss out all the difficulties. But anyway, there's a list in there, I'm just trying to find it actually whilst I was, of the sources of capital funding. Yes, it's on 114, paragraph 114. I just wondered what scope there was. First of all, where the money comes from in terms of grants, for example, and what scope there is for extending those and enlarging on our contributions.
So yeah, we've detailed in paragraphs 115 to 117 which the grants are. So there are a number of different grants. There's the basic need grant that comes through from DFE, and that's predominantly focused at school places. There's the high needs capital grant, which is focused on building send places, and then we've got the strategic maintenance grant as well, and that's the grant that covers maintained schools only. So there are 3 sets of grants as well, and then obviously there's the Section 106 contributions, and those are contributions that come in through developers and are specifically earmarked towards specific developments, essentially either at a school level or at a kind of locality level to meet some of the needs as a result of the housing growth as well.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next item, Mrs. Taylor, did you want to add anything?
No, not at the moment, thank you, Chair.
Always one of the harder reports to do in the year, and it's so much detail, but thank you very much for the clarity and for the hard work all the officers in your department are doing to try and keep us under difficult financial circumstances and straight and narrow, as it were. Right, we now move on to item 9 on the agenda, which is on page 51, and it's the Children and Families SEND and Inclusion Strategy 2024 to 2027. And are you taking us through this, Jane, or is it Alison? Alison, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the purpose of the report is to provide the committee with the refreshed Send and Inclusion Strategy, which is a key driver partnership strategy to support the education and care needs of children with and young people in Leicestershire with special educational needs and disability. And the views of the committee are sought as part of this consultation process. In paragraph 2, Just to note that the primary legislation regarding the Children and Young People with SEND in Children and Families Act is the 2014 Children and Families Act, and this sets out the duties that the local authority and integrated commissioning boards must fulfil. The SEND and Inclusion Strategy outlines the local priorities, set out how the County Council and its partners will improve services and outcomes over the next 3 years. The local area SEND and Inclusion Development Plan in section 5 of the strategy identifies 5 priorities of need, and these will be incorporated in ongoing improvements to deliver the requirements and outcomes of the accelerated progress plan, which is part of the last SEND inspection that we had. In paragraph 3, the 2024 strategy is a refresh of previous SEND and inclusion strategies that was taken to the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Board on the 1st of September 2020 and agreed by Cabinet on the 18th of September 2020. This is the third of the SEND and inclusion strategies and delivers the ambitions of the Children and Family Services Department for 2024 to 2026 and supports the aims of the Council's Strategic Plan 2022 to 2026, which was approved by the County Council in March 2022. Moving through the document and to the background, to note that in paragraph 7, the draft SEND and inclusion strategy has been developed in consultation with local area partners and parents and carers. It sets out the aspirations of the SEND and Inclusion Partnership Board for the period for the 24 to 27 period, in which there will be a further review of the strategy coming towards the end of that. In paragraph 8, the strategy provides the strategic steer for the SEND and Inclusion Partnership Board. The actions will be resourced through existing staffing and may be delivered as part of the programme of work. In paragraph 9, over the period of the previous strategy, the local area SEND and Inclusion Partnership have considered what works well, what the barriers are to achieving the vision for children and young people in Leicestershire, and the partnership has used the performance and outcome data to feedback from children and young people and their parents and carers to co-produce the priorities for the further development of this work. The priority areas set out are the children and families at the heart of all the service delivery. The department will have an accurate understanding of the needs and lived experiences of children and young people with SEND. Children and young people with SEND are prepared and for successful transition into their life. Leaders across the SEND partnership will work together to plan, deliver and quality assure the Leicestershire offer. And the department will provide timely and effective support to enable children and young people with SEND to thrive and belong as part of their communities. In paragraph 11, the implementation of the refreshed SEND and inclusion strategy would, as an existing strategy, be monitored by the SEND and Inclusion Partnership Board. Just a note in paragraph 13, in November 2024, the draft SEND and Inclusion Strategy was presented to the SEND and Inclusion Board. The Leicestershire Parent Carer Forum are active members in the SEND and Inclusion Board and have approved the draft strategy. The strategy has been presented to the Cabinet for approval in February 2024, and any comments made by the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee will be reported to the Cabinet. Again, an additional note, there's an easy read version of the strategy will be co-produced with the children and young people and their parents and carers once the strategy has received final sign-off by Cabinet. In paragraph 15, it should also be noted that this strategy is distinct from, but aligned to, the Special Educational Needs Disability Joint Commissioning Strategy 21 to 24 for Leicestershire, Leicester and Rutland, and work has commenced to refresh this LLR strategy ready for the April 2025 renewal of this. And it would take regard of the content of the Leicestershire SEND and Inclusion Strategy document being spoken about in this report. In paragraphs 16 to 19, that details the consultation process that will take place. And in paragraph 20, a public consultation on the draft strategy will seek to confirm the priorities identified within the strategy are the right focus for the improvement activity to be overseen by the Leicestershire SEND and Inclusion Partnership Board over the next 3 years. And in paragraph 21, it's proposed to hold an 8-week consultation exercise on the draft SEND and Inclusion Strategy for the 2024-2027 period. And this will be carried out primarily online with online survey, which will also be available in accessible print formats on request. Subject to the Cabinet's approval, this will commence on the 10th of February and run until the 6th of April 2025. And the timetables for the decisions are noted in paragraph 26 and 27. Paragraph 27 notes that the Cabinet will receive a further report at its meeting on the 17th of June 2025 regarding the feedback from the consultation exercise and presenting final strategy for approval. I'll end there and happy to take any questions on the report and the strategy itself.
Thank you very much, Alison. I too would like to highlight paragraph 13. And I think it's really due to the hard work, and I understand that the Send and Inclusion Board, the Leicestershire Parent Carer Forum, have worked very hard with you all to put the strategy together. So I think that needs to be noted, that we do appreciate all the work that all volunteers have done for the strategy. And I will now open it up to anybody else have any comments they wish to make. Oh, Mr. Hunt.
It's a really good report. It's easy to grasp and so on. And as the report says, it's an update on the previous one, and no doubt the Cabinet will be pleased to have it as well. The figures that were given on the page is not anyway, section 2 with the census figures. Presumably the census of, or the figures of the total population of Leicestershire, number of children, 26 and so on, are from the national census, and the rest of them in orange are from our school census, I'm guessing. So I just felt that ought to be acknowledged, and probably is in the text somewhere, which I've missed, but the source of these statistics I think is quite important. My question was about the end, if you like, of the SEND population that we're responsible for. We're looking there at 19 to 25. And I apologise for this, it's a bit anecdotal, but I read in the newspaper I read that some authorities don't know who their SEND population is in that later age group, and therefore can get lost, if you like, at that level of certainly of education, and then going out into the outside world, as it were. So when we present these figures, do we know who these children and adults are, or is it simply a census? And do we know who those 24, 25-year-olds who are losing our protection, if you like, are? Or are they simply census figures that we glean, to put it like that? That's all I wanted to ask, Chair.
Thank you. Over to you, Alison. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll come back on it. Yes, we do know all the data. We do know all those young people who've got an education healthcare plan, and that will be right up to the age of 25. And obviously the annual review process is part of that, reviewing where those young people would be.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, did you have any comments you wanted to make?
No, thank you, Chair.
Right, so we now move on to the final report on the agenda, which is the Q2 2024-25 performance report, which is on pages 105 to 116 of your agenda pack. I hand over to Sharon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The performance report is the normal performance report that we bring to each of the overview and scrutiny committees, with the purpose that it provides you with the update on the department's performance for a period, and this time it's the period of Q2, which is July to September 2024. Each time we come, we give a focus on either the services within my part of the department or the services within Alison's under the education and SEND part. So this report provides you with some of the national and local issues that are
are affecting performance and will drive performance, or could do in the future as we develop them. So paragraph 6 takes you through in some detail the paper Keeping Children Safe, Helping Families Thrive, which sets out the new government approach and vision for the safeguarding system, and it will bring in significant changes which will impact on the way we perform and report on performance. I won't go through in detail that information. It was referenced earlier in the director's update around the MTFS, and the proposal is that we bring a detailed full report on the policy statement and implementation plan to a future committee meeting. But obviously I'm happy to take any questions if there are at the end of the presentation. Paragraph 10 onwards takes you through some of the departmental performance activities. So 10 gives the progress around our residential redesign and our homes that are in partnership with Bernardo's. And again, in more detail earlier in the meeting, there has been a more detailed discussion about that. Paragraph 11 takes you through that in November of last year, we held our annual Pride in Practice event where we bring frontline staff together to focus on research, focus on key areas, and to celebrate the practice across the department. This year, sure it'll be no surprise, we were celebrating the Ofsted outcome, but we had around 400, just over 400 staff who attended that event and looked at showcasing and sharing some excellent practice across the service, and looked in particular about how we involve fathers and men in assessments and work. November takes you on through our our practice focus weeks, and then paragraph 13, 14 and 15 give you some other key updates around some public health funding that's been given into our targeted family help to develop a piece of work and resources for young people with a view to reducing poor mental health outcomes for children and young people. We delivered and were very much part of the Expression of Freedom exhibition that is around looking at the impact of victims of domestic abuse. And paragraph 15 outlines that there is a new a new framework for the His Majesty's inspection of probation. So that will set out and the way that we will be inspected around our youth justice services. So paragraph 16 onwards takes you through the key performance indicators that we report upon around children's social care and family help. So it takes you through our performance around child protection cases reviewed within timescale. So you'll see that we continue to perform really well there. We had a reduction, which is positive, on the percentage of children who become subject to a child protection plan for a second or subsequent time. We then look at the performance around re-referrals. Our re-referral percentages are higher than we would want them to be, and there is some focused auditing and performance work looking at that and the reasons for that. Percentage of assessments completed within 45 days, which is a target, and then some of our performance around children in care and care leavers, which remains relatively high and positive. So if I hand over now to Alison, who'll take you through some of the early years and education performance, and then we're both happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Chair. So taking this forward from paragraphs 29 onwards, so as to help every child to have access to good quality education to ensure they achieve their maximum potential. In the summary of paragraphs 29 to 31, the percentage of primary and secondary schools rated good or outstanding at the end of Q2 shows a slight increase on the previous period. In paragraph 33, the DfE have released their final assessment outcomes for the primary phase of the education and provisional assessment of outcomes for the secondary phase of education in 2024. These items are then detailed with more data in paragraphs 34 to 42. If I can then take you through to paragraph 42, we can see that paragraph 43, the number of children electively home educated was 1,119 at the end of Q2 24-25, and this is an increase of 120 students, in brackets we've got 10.7% there, compared to the previous quarter noted on that. And in paragraph 45, the percentage of young children, young people aged 16 to 17 in Leicestershire not in education, employment or training at the end of Q2 was 0.8%, 127 pupils that relates to, and this rate was a slight increase on the end of Q1, which it was 0.9%, but that is still below the target and less than the 2.1%. And again, as Sharon said, we're happy to take any questions on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think in some ways it's disappointing that more children are being educated at home, because I think socially and just all of us can remember our school days, and it isn't sitting at home looking at the computer because it weren't there, but you know, it is the social chances you have and what you learn from other people. So but I think this is nationwide. I don't think this is particularly Leicestershire. I think it was started during the COVID pandemic, but it seems to have been, it doesn't seem to be decreasing very much. It seems to be still going on, but it is a challenge for everybody, I think. Right, I'll open it up. Mrs. Jordan.
The children that are home educated, are there checks done to see the reasons they're being home educated, or you know whether they're being are in a safe place, like that child that was murdered that was home educated?
I can pick that up in two parts. In answer to the question, are they checked? At the beginning, when a family chooses to be electively home educated, there are very considered discussions that are had by both the school and both by the inclusion service to help the parent make their decisions based on what is available and what their requirements would be to do. But then in terms of the local authority's position, we have an opportunity to follow up on an annual basis, but then we don't drill down into the granular detail of what happens for those young people at this moment in time.
So children could potentially fall through the system and could potentially be in danger. Sorry?
Thank you. So I think it's a really challenging picture in relation to elective home education. So as you know, parents can choose to electively home educate their children, and the duty on the local authority is minimal in terms of elective home education. And as Alison says, we are required to do an annual visit in order to make sure that the education is sufficient, essentially. And then alongside that, we have our more general safeguarding duties that we would have for all children, regardless of where they're educated. So the majority of children that are home educated well, and they are cared for well, and that their needs are being met. And it's a choice of parents to provide education how they see fit for their children. As a local authority and as a safeguarding authority, we have a duty of care to all children, and we need to make sure that we have robust safeguarding procedures in place that mean that we can protect children, that members of the public and others are aware of where to raise issues as well. And that would apply for those children that are electively home educated. One of the protective factors for children we know is being in school. And so obviously there are concerns where children aren't in school. That's not always just because of elective home education. So we would always have concerns. And actually our safeguarding system is set up to make sure that we can use our best endeavours to make sure children are safe. Just for note, I guess that the government in the paper that we've referenced earlier are introducing some additional checks around elective home education for those children that we would be more worried about. So this isn't children whose parents have decided to educate their children at home, but where we're already concerned about children, so they might be on a child in need plan or a child protection plan, the government is introducing now a kind of additional layer of oversight of the local authority, which would mean that we would be able to have a little bit more influence into whether or not that child's electively home educated. So all of that will add to our ability to ensure that children are safe and safe in their homes.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, do you want any comments?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. My question was regarding referrals to CSC within 12 months, because we do seem to be drifting away from the targets. The target's under 18.7%. It was 24.9, now we've gone to 26.3. I think you mentioned you're doing an audit to look into that. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, that percentage just does fluctuate. The work that's been done and the auditing work that's been done is showing that is tending to be, not solely, but tending to be a high percentage of families where domestic abuse is an issue. And whilst assessments have been completed and programmes agreement around the outcome and the plan going forward being not to require a service from children's social care, they do after a period of time come back to the service. So we're linking it into our work that we do around domestic abuse and work with children and with families. We are linking it very much to that work that we do with the adult that harms to have most effect. And we're looking at what learning there is for the service. What it tends to be is not which is a positive as such, is that we're finding it's not that children are being referred and we at that stage are saying no further action. It's tending to be families where we have done an assessment, we have agreed a plan and a way forward, and some further incident happens in the future. So whilst that is a focus and it's a concern and will continue to be a focus, what I can reassure you of is this is not about us saying at the front door the threshold's not met and we therefore don't need to be involved or to assess that child and family, and then they come back very quickly afterwards. But it is still a focus of work for us.
Okay. I've been arranged a meeting. Our next meeting is the 4th of March, 2025. And item 12, I have no urgent items as mentioned at the start of the meeting. However, I would like to inform the committee that this will be Alison Bradley's last meeting, as she is leaving the organisation at the end of February. I understand she's taking up a new career and she is not retiring. Thank you very much for today's meeting, and I declare the meeting closed. But Alison, on behalf of all of us, I would like to thank you very much for all your hard work and the support you've given us, particularly the councillors and the other staff. It's not an easy job, but I'm sure you'll find your next career even more challenging. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Damien.